I pulled a drowning child from a hotel pool, and now I'm facing kidnapping charges. The detective arrested me in the hotel restaurant at 6:15 in the evening while I was having dinner with my business partner. Garrett Sinclair, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and assault of a minor. I had a fork halfway to my mouth when Detective Frank Garrison said it. My plate of salmon went cold as I stared up at him and the two uniformed officers behind him. What are you talking about? I asked. Garrison pulled out handcuffs. You grabbed a child from the pool area this afternoon and attempted to remove her from the premises. Her parents have filed charges. You need to come with us. My chest tightened. This afternoon at 3:30, I'd pulled a 7-year-old girl from the bottom of the pool where she'd been lying motionless for at least 30 seconds. I'd performed CPR until she coughed up water and started breathing again. Paramedics had arrived and taken her to the hospital. Her parents had been hysterical with gratitude. The mother had hugged me and sobbed thank you into my shoulder. The father had shaken my hand and promised he owed me everything. Now, 3 hours later, they were saying I'd tried to kidnap their daughter. Garrison wasn't interested in explanations. He cuffed me right there in the restaurant while other guests stared and whispered. My business partner, Colin Harper, stood up with his mouth open. Garrett, what the hell is happening? I told him I had no idea, but this was insane. Garrison led me through the lobby past the registration desk, where the staff I'd checked in with that morning watched with horrified expressions. The hotel was the Lakeside Grand, an upscale resort, where I'd been staying for a 3-day consulting conference. I'd presented that morning on supply chain optimization and spent the afternoon at the pool reading industry reports. That's when I'd seen the little girl underwater. She'd been drifting near the bottom in the deep end, her blonde hair floating around her head, her body completely still. No thrashing, no struggle, just stillness. I dropped my tablet and dove in fully clothed. The water was freezing. I swam down 8 feet, grabbed her under the arms and kicked to the surface. She wasn't breathing. I got her to the deck and started chest compressions exactly as I'd learned in the corporate safety training my company mandated every year. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. On the 3rd cycle, she coughed and water came up. She gasped and started crying. Her eyes opened. That's when her parents arrived, running from wherever they'd been. The mother dropped to her knees beside her daughter and pulled her into a crushing embrace. The father grabbed my hand and shook it hard, his eyes wet with tears. Thank you so much. You saved her life. The mother looked up at me and said the same thing over and over. Paramedics arrived minutes later and loaded the girl onto a stretcher. The parents left with her in the ambulance. I went back to my room to change clothes. That was 3 hours ago. The police station was sterile and fluorescent and smelled like disinfectant covering something worse. They processed me with fingerprints and photographs and put me in a holding cell for 2 hours before anyone explained what was actually happening. When they finally brought me to an interrogation room, Garrison sat across from me with a file and a recording device. Tell me what happened at the pool, he said. I explained everything. I'd been sitting in a lounge chair near the shallow end. The pool was moderately crowded with families and conference attendees. Around 3:25, I noticed a little girl swimming alone in the deep end. She went under and didn't come back up. I waited 10 seconds thinking she was diving, then 20 seconds. Then I realized she wasn't coming up at all. I dove in and pulled her out. She wasn't breathing. I did CPR. She lived. That's the entire story. Garrison opened his file and slid a statement across the table. It was from the girl's father, Dominic Ashford. The statement claimed I had been watching his daughter Maya for over an hour. That I had approached her in the shallow end while her parents were getting drinks. That I had grabbed her and dragged her into the deep end against her will. That I had held her underwater until she lost consciousness. That I had then pulled her out and performed CPR only when other hotel guests started approaching. That I had attempted to carry her away from the pool area, but her parents had intervened just in time. Every word was a lie. Every single word. This is completely fabricated, I said. The girl was alone and drowning. I saved her life. Why would her parents lie about this? Garrison leaned back. You tell me. Why would parents accuse someone of trying to kidnap their daughter if it didn't happen? I had no answer. The statement from the mother, Veronica Ashford, matched her husband's, word for word. Same sequence of events, Same accusations, same timeline. They claimed I'd been predatory and deliberate. They had a witness statement from someone named Richard Keller, who claimed he'd seen me watching children earlier in the day. I asked to see the hotel security footage. Garrison said it would be provided during discovery. They held me for 12 hours before my arraignment. Bail was set at $100,000. Colin posted it using his savings and picked me up at 7 a.m. the next morning. We drove back to the hotel in his rental car without speaking. When we got to my room, he finally turned to me. "Tell me everything." I walked him through every detail from the moment I saw Maya underwater to the moment her parents thanked me. Colin listened carefully. He was a contracts attorney, not criminal defense, but he understood how to analyze situations. "None of this makes sense," he said. "If you were trying to kidnap a child, you wouldn't do it in a crowded pool in broad daylight. And the parents thanked you. I saw them. The mother was crying on your shoulder." I told him that's exactly what happened. Colin pulled out his phone and started searching. "Dominic and Veronica Ashford. Let's see what we can find." He found their social media profiles within minutes. Dominic was 45, worked as an investment banker. Veronica was 38, listed as a former model and current philanthropist. They lived in a mansion in Connecticut worth $6 million. Their daughter Maya attended an elite private school. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Colin kept digging and found something interesting. 6 months ago, Dominic had been investigated by the SEC for insider trading. The investigation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the news articles suggested the case had been close. Dominic had powerful attorneys and connections that made prosecution difficult. "He's connected," Colin said, "which means he doesn't make accusations without a reason." I asked what he thought the reason could be. Colin shook his head. "I don't know yet, but we need a criminal defense attorney immediately, someone who specializes in false accusations." He made calls, and by that afternoon had found me a lawyer named Elizabeth Blackwell. She had a reputation for being ruthless and brilliant. We met in her office downtown at 5Y. Blackwell was in her 40s with sharp features and an intensity that made me trust her immediately. She listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she steepled her fingers. "The hotel security footage will determine everything. If it shows what you described, the charges disappear. But if it's ambiguous or if it's been tampered with, we have a serious problem. The Ashfords have resources. They don't make moves without strategy." She requested the security footage from the prosecutor's office. They said it would be provided within a week. Blackwell pushed for immediate access given the severity of the charges. They agreed to expedite. We received the footage 2 days later. Blackwell called me to her office urgently. The video was queued up on her computer. "Watch carefully," she said. The footage showed the pool area from a high angle. I could see myself in the lounge chair with my tablet. The timestamp showed 3:24 p.m. Maya Ashford was visible in the pool swimming in the shallow end. Her parents were nowhere in the frame. At 3:26, Maya began swimming toward the deep end. She was a confident swimmer, her strokes smooth and purposeful. She reached the deep end and dove down. She stayed under for 15 seconds, then 20, then 25. At 30 seconds, I stood up from my chair. At 33 seconds, I dove in. The footage showed me swimming down, grabbing Maya, bringing her to the surface, lifting her onto the deck. I started CPR immediately. At 3:29, Dominic and Veronica appeared from the right side of the frame, running toward us. They reached Maya just as she coughed up water. Veronica dropped to her knees and grabbed her daughter. Dominic shook my hand. The footage showed them thanking me. It showed Veronica hugging me. It showed paramedics arriving and taking Maya away on a stretcher. It showed the Ashfords leaving with their daughter. Nothing in the footage supported their accusations. Everything supported my version. Blackwell paused the video. "This should exonerate you completely, but there's something wrong here." She rewound to the moment before Maya dove down. She played it in slow motion. At 3:25:50, Maya was treading water in the deep end. She looked up toward the left side of the frame where the camera couldn't quite reach. She seemed to be looking at someone. Then she took a deep breath and dove straight down. She didn't swim. She didn't move her arms or legs once she was submerged. She just sank to the bottom and stayed there motionless. She's not drowning, Blackwell said quietly. She's holding her breath deliberately. Someone told her to do this. I stared at the screen. She was right. Maya's behavior didn't match accidental drowning. She'd positioned herself, taken a preparation breath, and descended with control. This was intentional. Her parents told her to do it, I said. But why? Why would they tell their daughter to fake drowning? Blackwell fast-forwarded to the moment after I performed CPR. In slow motion, I could see Dominic's face as he shook my hand. His expression wasn't gratitude. It was calculation. His eyes moved from my face to the security camera above us. He was checking to make sure everything was being recorded. Veronica's hug looked genuine, but when Blackwell zoomed in, I could see her face over my shoulder. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry and focused. She was performing for the camera. They staged this, Blackwell said. They had Maya fake drowning, knowing someone would jump in to save her. Then they thanked you publicly so it would be recorded. Later, they filed charges claiming the opposite happened. They're creating a he said, she said situation where your word contradicts their word. I felt sick. But the video proves I'm telling the truth. It shows them thanking me. Blackwell shook her head. It shows physical actions, but not intent. A defense attorney could argue they thanked you because they were in shock and didn't realize what you'd actually done. They could claim they reviewed the footage later and realized you'd grabbed Maya without cause. They could say their initial gratitude was trauma response. She closed the video file. We need to understand their motive. Why would wealthy parents stage their daughter's drowning and frame her rescuer? She hired a private investigator named Maxwell Cross, a former police detective who specialized in financial investigations. Cross started digging into the Ashfords' background. He reported back within 3 days. Dominic Ashford wasn't just an investment banker. He was a managing partner at Ashford Capital Management, a firm that handled investments for extremely wealthy clients. The firm managed over $2 billion in assets, but Cross had found irregularities in recent SEC filings. The firm had reported significant losses in the previous quarter. Over $200 million had disappeared from client accounts. Dominic was currently under investigation again, this time by federal prosecutors looking into potential fraud. He's in serious trouble, Cross said. If the fraud charges stick, he's looking at 20 years minimum and complete asset forfeiture. His family would lose everything. Blackwell leaned forward. So why create a scandal involving his daughter? How does that help him? Cross pulled out more documents. 2 weeks before the pool incident, Dominic purchased a $10 million life insurance policy on himself, with Maya as the sole beneficiary. The policy has a double indemnity clause for accidental death. If Dominic dies in an accident, Maya receives $20 million held in an irrevocable trust that federal prosecutors can't touch, even if he's convicted of fraud. I tried to follow the logic. So he was planning to die? To fake his own death? Cross shook his head. I think he was planning something else. Let me show you something. He pulled up Maya's medical records that he'd obtained through legal channels. 3 weeks before the pool incident, Maya had been admitted to a private hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. The notes indicated she'd been having nightmares and anxiety attacks. She'd told her therapist she was afraid of her father. She'd said he'd been acting strange and asking her to do things that scared her. The therapist had recommended family counseling. Dominic had refused and pulled Maya from therapy. He was preparing her, Blackwell said, teaching her to hold her breath underwater, coaching her on what to do. The nightmares and anxiety were her response to being forced into whatever plan he had, Cross continued. Here's where it gets darker. The medical examiner's office has a flagged report from Maya's pediatrician from 6 months ago. Maya had bruises consistent with being held underwater forcefully. The doctor suspected abuse and filed a report with Child Protective Services. The investigation was closed after Dominic's attorneys intervened and provided alternative explanations. I felt rage building. He's been practicing this with her. He's been hurting his own daughter to prepare for whatever this is. Blackwell was already making notes. We need to understand the end game. If Dominic is facing fraud charges and wants to protect assets through Maya's insurance trust, how does framing you fit into his plan? Cross pulled out his phone and showed us a news article from that morning. It was about a different case in Oregon, where a man had been accused of attempted child abduction at a public pool. The man had been murdered by the child's father before trial. The father had claimed self-defense and wasn't charged. The article mentioned public support for the father's actions. "He's going to kill you," Cross said flatly. "That's the plan. He frames you for attempted kidnapping. Public opinion turns against you. Then he kills you and claims he was protecting his daughter. He becomes a hero. The fraud investigation gets buried under sympathy. His assets are protected. And if federal prosecutors come after him later, he's got public support as a grieving father who saved his child from a predator." The room went silent. Blackwell's jaw was set. "We need to go to the FBI immediately. This isn't just false accusation. It's conspiracy to commit murder." We met with federal prosecutors the next morning. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Diana Frost, who'd been investigating Dominic's fraud case. She listened to our evidence with growing alarm: the insurance policy, the staged drowning, Maya's therapy records, the Oregon case. "This is consistent with his pattern," Frost said. "Dominic Ashford is a narcissist who views people as chess pieces. If he's decided you're a threat or an opportunity, he'll use you without hesitation." She showed us more evidence from their fraud investigation. Dominic had embezzled money from his clients over 5 years. He'd created false investment reports and phantom companies. When clients started asking questions, he'd staged emergencies to distract them. One client who'd threatened to sue had died in a suspicious car accident that was ruled accidental. Another client who'd gone to the SEC had been accused of tax fraud and spent 2 years fighting charges before being exonerated. "He eliminates obstacles," Frost said. "You saved his daughter's life, which means you disrupted whatever he had planned at that pool. Now he needs you gone." I asked what he'd actually planned. Frost pulled out a confidential report. "We believe Dominic was going to let Maya drown. The life insurance policy kicks in only if he's alive to claim it as her guardian. But if Maya dies, there's a separate policy that pays him directly. We think he was testing whether he could get away with it. When you intervened, he had to pivot to framing you instead." Blackwell stared at her. "You're saying he was willing to murder his own daughter for insurance money?" Frost nodded grimly. "We've been building a case but couldn't prove intent. Now, with your evidence about the staged drowning and the false accusations, we can demonstrate pattern and premeditation." She offered me protective custody, but I refused. "If Dominic thinks I'm scared and hiding, he wins. I want him to make a move so you can catch him." Frost reluctantly agreed, but assigned federal agents to watch me. They were discreet, but present. Cross continued investigating and found something crucial. He traced the witness, Richard Keller, who'd claimed to see me watching children. Keller was a convicted fraudster who'd worked with Dominic 10 years earlier. They'd both been involved in a mortgage scheme that collapsed. Keller had gone to prison. Dominic had escaped charges by testifying against his partners. Keller had been released 6 months ago and immediately contacted Dominic looking for money. Cross found text messages between them discussing the pool setup. Dominic had paid Keller $50,000 to be at the pool that day and provide false testimony against me. The messages included Dominic's explicit instructions about what Keller should say he'd witnessed. Blackwell filed an emergency motion showing the witness was paid and had a criminal relationship with the accuser. She provided all evidence to the local prosecutor and demanded charges be dropped immediately. The prosecutor, a man named Gerald Hoffman, reviewed the evidence and called a meeting. Dominic arrived with his attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Stuart Barnes, who'd clearly been handling his fraud defense. Barnes tried to dismiss our evidence as circumstantial. Hoffman cut him off and showed him the text messages between Dominic and Keller. Barnes's expression darkened. He turned to Dominic. "Tell me you didn't pay a witness to lie." Dominic's face was calm. "I have no idea what they're talking about. I've never communicated with Richard Keller." Hoffman showed him the phone records and message transcripts. Dominic's number was on every communication. Barnes looked at his client with barely concealed fury. "You told me this case was legitimate. You said your daughter was victimized." Dominic stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. You have no proof of anything." Frost stepped forward. She'd been waiting in the hallway. "Dominic Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. witness tampering, insurance fraud, and child endangerment. Federal agents entered from both doors. Dominic tried to run, but they grabbed him. He was cuffed and removed while Barnes stood frozen, realizing his career was imploding. Veronica was arrested separately at their Connecticut home. She'd been cooperating with investigators once she realized Dominic's plan had included potentially killing Maya. She provided detailed testimony about his escalating behavior and his explicit statements about needing to eliminate obstacles. The trial took place 4 months later. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the insurance policies, the staged drowning captured on hotel security footage, the text messages with Keller, Maya's therapy records showing her father's psychological abuse, Veronica's testimony about Dominic's plan to murder me and claim hero status. Expert witnesses explained how Dominic had been training Maya to hold her breath underwater for weeks, how he'd been preparing her for something terrible, how my intervention had saved her life but disrupted his timeline. The defense tried to argue everything was coincidence and misinterpretation. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted Dominic on all counts. He received 35 years in federal prison. Keller received 10 years for conspiracy and perjury. Veronica received probation in exchange for her testimony and lost custody of Maya, who went to live with Veronica's sister in California. All charges against me were dismissed with prejudice. The court issued a formal apology. Hoffman's office made a public statement acknowledging I'd acted heroically and had been maliciously targeted by a criminal. But the damage was real. My consulting firm lost clients who'd read about the kidnapping charges. My reputation in supply chain management took years to rebuild. Colleagues who'd known me for decades treated me differently, always with a hint of uncertainty about what had really happened. I filed a civil suit against Dominic for defamation. The judgment was for $5 million. He'd never pay it from prison, but having the judgment mattered. It was official recognition that I'd been deliberately destroyed by someone evil. Maya reached out through her therapist 2 years after the trial. She was 9 years old, living with her aunt, in intensive therapy to process her father's abuse. She wanted to apologize. We met at a family counseling center with therapists present. Maya was tiny and fragile, nothing like the confident swimmer I'd pulled from the pool. "I'm sorry my dad hurt you," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "He made me practice drowning in our pool at home for weeks. He said it was a game, but it wasn't. I was so scared. Thank you for saving me, even though it hurt you." I told her none of it was her fault, that her father had used her terribly, that she was brave for surviving and for telling the truth. We met twice more over the following year. Slowly, Maya began to heal. Her aunt said she'd started swimming again, cautiously but with joy. She'd decided she wanted to be a doctor someday to help people. 3 years after my arrest, new federal legislation passed strengthening penalties for false child victim accusations made for financial gain. The law was called the Sinclair Protection Act. I testified before Congress during the hearings, told my story, watched it become part of legislative record. The work transformed trauma into meaning, personal suffering into systemic protection. I rebuilt my consulting career gradually, found clients who cared about competence over scandal. I started a foundation providing legal support to people falsely accused in situations involving children. The work gave purpose to what I'd survived. Last month, I was at a community center when I saw a child struggling in a pool. For 3 seconds, I froze, remembering handcuffs and accusations. Then I jumped in and pulled the kid to safety. The parents were grateful. No police came, but those 3 seconds of hesitation proved Dominic had succeeded in damaging something essential. He'd made me afraid that helping meant danger. That wound stays. Dominic's appeals were all denied. He'll die in federal prison. Veronica sends updates about Maya, sometimes. Maya is thriving in middle school, excelling in science, still in therapy but progressing. She volunteers teaching water safety to younger children now, transforming her trauma into protection for others. The Sinclair Protection Act has prevented 43 false accusations, according to federal records. 43 people who weren't arrested because investigators followed new protocols. That's the real victory. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.